So we're sitting here with Seth Price, who was one of our, I guess, attachments, right, Seth?
You can call me a pogue. That's what I was.
Oh, buddy, you're out there cutting your teeth with the rest of us. We won't do you that bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was one of the attached intel guys. I came from the S2 shop and got dropped off one day in the bayonet training room, and they're like, "Here's your new intel guy," and everyone looked around like, "What?"
Well, and to our listeners, and we kind of mentioned this in episode 1, it was pretty unusual to have a company level intel guy, just like it was weird for us to have a PA and all these other things. So before we go into that, because it's actually a pretty fascinating story about how you ended up at the company and what was supposed to be the way your job worked and what actually happened, just give us a brief intro to yourself, man. How'd you end up joining the Army? How'd you choose your MOS? And what brought you to Sperwan Ghar? Or I guess you can leave that story off how you got to Bravo Company.
So I graduated college in 2009, and the economy had tanked. Nobody's finding jobs. I was either going to go to graduate school or find a job, and at the time I didn't think graduate school was the right thing for me to do. So I'm out looking for jobs, and I had an Army recruiting station like around the corner from the condo I lived in. And I walked in one day, I was like, I need a job. So I sat down, and the recruiter they went through their spiel. And when I took the ASVAB, they're like, okay, you can pretty much do any job you want. They had Intel Analyst. I was like, that sounds promising, and it looks like something that would have maybe a good career future. So that's what I went with. After the train up through basic training, and then AIT, I found my way down to Fort Stewart, which, I mean, luckily it wasn't that far from where I grew up, so I could go home on the weekends and take advantage of being so close to Florida. When word got out that we were going to head to Afghanistan, they frantically came up with all these training opportunities for us, and one of them was the company intelligence support team. And
with team
what that really
being
is,
the key word there.
Team. Team
Of one.
Team of one. So what that training was is pretty much our AIT condensed down to a 1-week course, and it's meant, honestly, for the infantryman or somebody from one of the line companies to come through this training and figure out how to do intel work on a really basic level. So they took 4 of us. They just lined us up and like, you're going to Alpha Company and you're going to Bravo Company. I was like, so I get there, and they introduced me to the training room, and then the first sergeant, and then Captain Kitching, and I'd met all of them before throughout my normal job, but now I'm joining their ranks, so it's very different. You're working in an S2 shop, it's very lax. There's no military courtesies given to any of the other guys you work with. You may stand at parade rest for an NCO. You may not. But infantryland, we all know that's very different, especially in garrison. So it took a little bit of time getting used to, but man, I am so glad I got thrown into bayonet company.
What was it like being in that headquarters platoon? I mean, everyone else is an infantryman. I don't even, except for maybe the combo guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now.
Olive.
Yeah, Olive.
Yeah, but working in headquarters, it's different because everybody has their job, and you at a company level, you're probably the only guy doing your job. So, like, Olive could reach out to me for help with some commo stuff, but I'm looking at the radios like, I don't know what you're asking me to do. And if I asked him to do some intel work, he'd be looking like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. So we each had our responsibilities, and like we were trusted to do those. And that was, I mean, there's a lot of freedom. Like, you set your hours, but you better get your work done.
Right.
And then a lot of times, well, you're, well, especially on deployment, you're never done.
So, but before we deployed, all this information's trickling in about where we're going. Can you talk a little about what you were hearing before we left, especially from the intel side? Because you were hearing stuff that even probably the platoon sergeants and stuff weren't really hearing.
Yeah. So we knew pretty quickly, we're going to Afghanistan, we're going to Kandahar. And then it took a little bit longer to get more details. And that once we did find out that, hey, you're going to Panjwai. I mean, Commander, Captain Kitching, his eyes got wide because his brother was there. So he's like, we're going to do a conference call with my brother. We're going to pick his brain. We're going to send him some emails, get him to provide as much as he could. So we did that, and I mean, it's drinking from the fire hose and having no combat experience at the time. It's like, I don't even know what to ask or focus on when he provides this information. Luckily, Captain Kitching had that connection, and he understood what the Afghan fight was. Nobody that I was aware of in our battalion had even done an Afghan deployment. They'd all been focused on Iraq for the previous
the
9
leadership,
years.
Especially, obviously in the NCOs there was some folks who had been, but not many even in that world.
It was very few that had been to Afghanistan, and
like in the company there's only like 3 people that had been.
Yeah. So yeah, it's eye opening to all the guys who are like, okay, Afghanistan, it's going to be different than what we're used to. I mean, it was a mechanized infantry battalion.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, and we've gone into a lot about like that switch in mentality for everybody.
It's a big switch.
Yeah, it was a big shift for us to have to make, for sure.
Nobody at Fort Stewart, no unit had even been there before from Fort Stewart. So maybe some aviation, but we had no contact with them. But any of the actual line units across the division, none of them had gone. So who do you reach out to locally for that expertise, that knowledge and understanding?
How much use was the previous unit? Were they providing a whole lot of info to you, or?
So we did start getting some emails from the unit while we were still in garrison, and it was just, hey, look, this is the type of op tempo. This is the area we're at, and pretty much really basic stuff that, hey, this is what you'd expect when you get here. I know they provided a breakdown of what Sperwan Ghar was like. They did pass that. The living conditions were pretty good, so we were like, okay, that's good to know.
Right.
Yay, Sperwan Ghar.
Yeah.
So you were one of the few that wasn't surprised when you got there and saw how nice it was.
I mean, you hear what they say, but it's like, how real is it until you get there?
Sure.
And I know I was I was on the first helicopter after we got to CAF. I was on the first helicopter into Sperwan Ghar. And we get there and we're like, oh my gosh, this is nice. This is big. This is big. And like, just an infantry company going to be here?
Yeah.
This is it?
Yeah.
This is amazing. So, yeah, they kind of gave us a heads up of what it was like. And then, I mean, really, there's not much you can do with that because you're getting that information, and then you're going on your pre-deployment leave. You're checking the box, all the different stuff you have to do. So you're drinking from that fire hose and trying to do your best and get ready. I mean, I know this was your second deployment, Luke, and it was my first. It was so many people in that company. It was their first deployment.
Yeah.
It was a really young company.
It was. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's probably Captain Kitching's 6th or 7th deployment, but he's a different animal.
I think it was his 3rd.
third that he's willing to tell you about.
Yeah, right.
Very, very interesting workup. I mean, going through NTC with the company was fun. I really got to know the company leadership a lot during that. The XO, Tim Boss, we hit it off pretty well, and at NTC, and we've been close friends ever since.
So once we're there, we start to settle into what in the military we call it battle rhythm, which is kind of like your day-to-day grind. Information comes in, information goes out. Most civilians, normal people would just call it their routine, but we had to make it sound army, so we call it battle rhythm. Can you kind of describe what your kind of day-to-day routine was as an intel guy? Like, where were you getting your information? What did you do with it? Like, how much? Like, what was it kind of like?
So I would get a ton of emails every day that I'd have to sift through, find the relevant information in reporting. I would get information sent down from our battalion headquarters, from brigade, that I'd have to sift through, find what's relevant for our exact AO. Because they wouldn't always send it, hey, this is Sperwan Ghar related, this is for Bayonet Company. They would send stuff kind of for the battalion in general. And so sifting through that, finding out what was important for us and for the operations we were doing was like one of the first things I would do in the morning. I'd get up early before breakfast. I'd be in there and I'd be reading through emails and trying to figure out what was important for that day. And I mean, I'd spend the rest of the day going through that, finding out, different threat levels of the different villages that we were operating in, so I could, provide that to you guys before operations. I would do threat assessments of those. I would build out I would track our SIGACs.
What does SIGAC stand for?
All the significant activity or events that happened. So anytime you guys were in a firefight, there's a SIGAC firefight. Right. And I would have to track that because our higher headquarters would want that information.
Yeah, so for you as an intel guy, I got two questions. One is when we would get these like big bumps, like something would come down the pipeline of a high value target or IED compound, something would come down that we had to work on really quickly. What did that look like for you? And then also, what did the big operations look like for you in terms of your job?
So things like a IED compound or a high value target, a lot of times it would come over a phone call. Hey, look, this is something somebody at a much higher level found, and we got good solid reporting on this. We need you to send somebody or send a patrol out and hit this compound or find this person. And if it was that important, they would call, because an email could get lost. Because, I mean, when you get hundreds of emails, thousands maybe a day, that stuff can get missed.
So would these calls always come from like 123, or would they come from anywhere that could feed us the information?
It was usually from 123 or from the brigade.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, most of them would come from 123. So yeah. Over at Zangabad, their 2 shop would call, or their 3 shop would call and say, hey, we're tasking you guys to go do this. And the proper response is, Roger, moving out. So,
and how many times the response was, fuck off, that's stupid?
Probably not as many as we should have. Because I'm sure there's some of those operations they sent us on that were kind of dumb.
Mm-hmm. Almost all.
Like I remember one. It got fed to us because there was some article in some newspaper.
Oh yeah, that's come up many times.
Yeah. So okay, you guys remember obviously. Oh, yeah. Not to go into detail, but just because something was in a newspaper doesn't mean it's real.
Yeah.
But it's in the New York Times, Seth.
Just because it's in the news doesn't mean it's real.
Yeah. Yep.
And doesn't mean that we should action on it, because how relevant or how reliable and how current is their reporting?
Well, and more importantly, the Taliban can read too. So if there's an article saying that there's something here, and there's a pretty good guess we're going to walk there, there's almost a certainty that it's going to be a trap, as we found out.
Yeah. So sometimes you can't, you can say no as much as you want, but when somebody who outranks you says, hey, you're going to do it, well, you're going to do it.
Yeah, for
eventually.
Sure.
That's why it was awesome being a pilot, because I could say no. Because they weren't going to climb up in that helicopter and fly it for me.
Yeah. What about the big operations then? Because I'm assuming you had a little bit more, forewarning about those. You could actually take time to build up intelligence and things like that.
For some of them, yeah. Like when we did the clearing of the Horn, there was quite a bit of intelligence development into that. Like we knew, okay, so typically Intel is supposed to drive operations. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. It's an Army. It's in a field manual. It's doctrine. It doesn't always work that way, though. A lot of times somebody says, hey, we're going to do this operation. Let's find some intel to back it up.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I think clearing the Horn, as necessary as that would be to go through and clear these villages and push the Taliban back, unless there's intel saying, hey, look, this is a village where the Taliban's hanging out a lot at, and they have stashes here, we're really just pushing through to push through. Yeah. So having to go and now find the intel of, okay, what villages should we focus on? It's harder to provide the intel for those types of operations when you're doing it after they've already said, hey, you're going to clear this area.
Sure.
So it really comes down to not providing intel of where we're going to clear and find things of value in clearing, but let's get a threat assessment of the IED networks, or let's figure out where the IED belts are. What is an area they're trying to protect? And that would give us the better situational awareness when we're actually pushing through. And talking about clearing the Horn, when Captain Kitching told me, hey, look, you're coming with us, I sat down, I thought for a second, I was like, what am I going to do out there? and he told me, he's like, look, I want you to be the best intel analyst you can be, and the only way you're going to be proficient at it is if you know what the infantryman goes through.
Sure.
So you're going to go out there and you're going to be the best intel analyst on the field that day, and you're going to enjoy it. So I was like, all right, let me get ready. Yeah. And I went, and man, I had a quite the experience out there clearing the Horn. But that's the type of stuff that intel operationally down at the tip of the spear, it's very different than what a lot of people think. Oh, you're intel analyst, you're so far removed and you don't really know what the guys are doing. And for a lot of intel analysts, that's reality, because they've never been there. They don't know what the actual infantryman is going through.
Well, that had to be invaluable experience, because the Horn was a hell of a fight for our company, and especially for you guys up there in the northern part of our clearing element. Yeah, so that had to be pretty invaluable experience, because then when you see that intel, because this was your first time really going on a serious patrol, right? And for the deployment.
I've been on several shorter ones, but this is definitely the first one where we actually went out and, hey, this is going to be several days.
Yeah, and we knew we were going to get into the thick of it too.
Yeah.
So
and hey, this isn't your AO either. We're pushing you out past your AO through, what was it, like 2-3 other companies' AOs, and you're going to go clear it all.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be fun.
So we actually haven't really had the chance to talk about the Horn much on the podcast. So give me a couple of minutes, and I'm going to kind of set the stage, and then I want you to tell us your perspective on this story. Sure. So as we've already briefly discussed, this was a massive battalion operation, or is it brigade level?
I want to say it's a brigade mandated operation, but it was.
But the battalion was the nuts.
It was at the battalion level.
Yeah. So this is a massive battalion level operation to clear essentially the tip of the Horn of Panjwai, which Curtis and I have already described in previous episodes. Our company, out of our 3 platoons, the second platoon stayed on the COP, and they ran trucks back and forth and doing different kinds of admin stuff, and they had to keep up. And we had to keep an element on Sperwan Ghar, obviously, and also they did the ALP missions and things like that. But first platoon was the southernmost element for the battalion, and we were just frog marching along the really open ground and sparsely kind of distributed villages right before the Registan. Just to the south of us was our trucks, which Curtis was in that element. Lucky duck. Well, maybe not so lucky since you had an IED. But first platoon was, we were in these sparsely populated villages, big, long, open stretches. And third platoon and headquarters attached to third platoon was to our north, usually a couple 300 meters. And then obviously as the Horn narrowed, we got funneled closer and closer together. And so that the last day, I think we actually ended up linking up with third and pushing through. But to set the stage even further, for us as first platoon, clearing the Horn was an entirely different experience because it was, a 6-day operation? Does that sound right?
Something like that.
Yeah. So right in those middle 2 or 3 days, you guys were taking contact every day. That middle day of the operation where it was really bad, you guys took a lot of contact and you got into some really, really heavy firefights. And we, in the south, even if we were only a couple 100 meters away, and we've talked about this a lot too, about how just that distance can make such a huge difference in your experience of an operation or a patrol. Yeah. But we were more or less just sitting there watching all this go on, from a distance. And the closest we came on that middle day, we tried to push into you guys, but by the time we got there, you guys had already bunkered down and set up an OP and a grape hut, and the day was pretty much wrapped up. Because I remember that's when I walked into the OP. I think that's the picture, the really famous picture. Everybody's got their IVs in and stuff. Everybody's dehydrated, and then we separated from you and went back to the south, and that was more or less how it continued for the rest of that clearing operation. So and then down south with the trucks, you guys, Curtis, what were y'all doing?
I mean, it's pretty even less eventful there, other than getting my shit rocked by that IED. Mm-hmm. Essentially what we do is we just kind of drove parallel to you guys. We were in that riverbed, which was, sometimes it was kind of quicksandy, but like for the most part it was fine. We just drove up the riverbed. And as you guys needed supplies, MREs, whatever, you would usually detach an element, come to the edge of the riverbed. We would drive as close as we could get, give you a handoff of supplies, and then we would kind of continue to parallel you. I believe at nights we would get up into the Horn with you and provide security for the overnight spots. But for the most part, we literally just drove a whole bunch of trucks full of supplies. That way, we could resupply you. Probably the most interesting things that happened was the IED, and we did like a couple C-130 drops, which were kind of cool.
Yeah, those were cool.
But there was no contact with us other than the IED. No firefights, nothing like that. So we were mostly just listening on the radio. It actually kind of sucked to that extent to not be out there on the ground with you guys. But at the same time, it was kind of nice to be chilling in my air-conditioned MATV for 6 days.
Yeah. Well, that was it for us too. Like we the closest we got is, I remember very specifically, because it was killing us, because we wanted to push to you guys to push to your numbers, because you guys were in the thick of it, and try to provide some kind of security. But we just couldn't get there quick enough. And I remember the closest I got was probably me and Sarnat and a couple of guys hopped up on a compound when the firefight was kind of on the latter chunk of the firefight. It wasn't really in the thick of it. It was in that last little push. I think the medevac and stuff had taken off by then. And I just remember scanning and hoping to see somebody, because I was like, we can't do shit for these guys. So Our experience of this was significantly different than yours, Seth. So please tell us what happened up there to the north.
Talking about Grace coming through with the trucks one night, we had taken over a compound, and we had been in a firefight for a couple hours trying to take over this compound so we could actually use it to sleep one night. And I remember that later that night, after pretty much we had fought off the attack, the trucks come down this really narrow road. It's like, how are they even getting in here? And yeah, they provided Overwatch for us that night, and we were so grateful because, I mean, we'd been fighting just to take over this compound, and several different groups of Taliban had just kept shooting and shooting and shooting. So having the trucks there that night, it allowed us to actually get some rest, to recuperate from the day we had just had. And then early the next morning we push off and we start walking west into the Horn, and we had gotten to a point where part of 3rd Platoon had been bounding and got to a grape hut that had an ID right at the door, and they had sent up an element to go and clear it, and they had told me, and it felt like I was herding cats because I had a huge group of Afghan, I want to say it was Afghan police with me, and a couple other people from brigade who had been attached to us. That, here I was, the one guy with a radio and comms to the rest of our platoon. So they're in the rear with me as they go and clear this ID, and then we're told, hey, start pushing forward. So I take this element of cats, and we start pushing forward through this wheat field, and then we start taking fire. So we get down, and the Afghans, they kind of went back to the grape hut we had just been in. So they go hang out back there, and I'm getting shot at. So the first thing I remember to do is get as low as you can. And so I'm in the grape hut. I'm not in a position to return fire where I am because there's the platoon element that's ahead of me. And so I get down and start crawling toward a mud wall, and I get up to it, and throughout that time the intensity of the firefight up ahead of me had continued to grow. And so I get to the wall where the element I'm with, we regroup with the rest of the headquarters element and the portion of the platoon that had fallen back to that wall, and we're starting to engage in the firefight, and that's when the PL, Lieutenant McGrath, he comes over the wall, and as he comes over the wall, he gets shot, and it's the $1 million wound right in the butt. And so he goes down, and I mean, we all know Lieutenant McGrath's a big goofball. So what's he do? He quotes Forrest Gump, and he's like, something jumped up and bit me.
Yeah. It literally got just a grazing wound. It grazed his huge ass.
It was a graze, but he got shot. So he goes down. He like barrel rolls in the air as he's jumping over this wall, and he goes down. And then right after him comes one of the military working dogs and his handler. The dog's name's Sicario, and he's a ferocious. Was he a German Shepherd or a Belgian Malinois?
He was a Belgian Malinois.
Yeah. And
I remember he was ferocious because he's one of only 2 dogs on the whole deployment that the handlers wouldn't let me pet their dog.
Yeah, he was quite the dog. But so he comes over next, and then obviously right after him is his handler, and that's MA2 Sean Brazos from the Navy. And as Sean's coming over the wall, he gets shot in the back, right below the plate, his right below his SAPI plate, and he goes down. And one of the infantrymen that's nearby, I want to say it was Sergeant Heaton, he yells, "Get the dog!" And Sergeant Rudy, the medic that was with the headquarters element, he was probably 10 feet from me on the other side of where Lieutenant McGrath and MA2 Brazos had come over this wall. And so he's trying to get to Sean so he can start rendering aid. And when I heard Sergeant Heaton yell, "Get the dog," I mean, I'm the closest person to the dog. And so I just jump up and I tackle the dog. I tackle Sicario, and he's a big Belgian Malinois with some amazing teeth. And I wrestled him for, I don't know how long it was, but it was the entirety of that firefight. And I just wouldn't let go of him because he was trying to protect his handler. That's what he's trained to do, is be there, and his handler is down. And now all these other guys are starting to try to render aid to him, so the dog wants to protect him. So here I am getting shot at in a fatal funnel, wrestling a military working dog that could easily have bitten me multiple times, and I didn't get bit once. I remember at one point the medevac had landed and took off again because it got lit up by a PKM. And so like it did a touch and go and just took off. And after that, we got swarmed by Kiowas and Apaches doing gun run after gun run. And the close air support they provided really knocked down the Taliban element that we were fighting. And when the medevac finally landed the second time, we were able to load Sean and Sicario on that helicopter. It wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. And our day had been so rough already that everyone was exhausted. We started having people drop as heat casualties. We were low on ammo. We were in a really rough situation, and if we were supposed to continue pushing forward that day, it was going to be really hard. So we find the next closest grape hut, and we set up that OP, and we reconsolidate. We rack out for, I don't know, a couple hours, it felt like. And people are getting IVs to get their hydration up. We have the helicopters providing overwatch the entire time. And we regroup, we eat some food, we get ammo supplied to us. The helicopters are dropping like Gatorade out their door for us. And we get to a point where we're able to push on for the next objective, and it's just...
I mean, how much had you gotten to know Sean before all that went down? 'Cause you guys been out for a couple of days, right?
Yeah, we had just met when we were getting spun up for the operation, and so we had been able to talk a couple nights. When we'd bunker down, the simple small talk you do when you're on a patrol with new people. So you spend that time, you get to know each other, and I mean, it was just amazing what the Navy dog handlers would do, and they were such a vital part of our team.
Yeah, we've talked about them a lot. I think, and Braz's story is, precisely one of the reasons why we have such a big spot in our heart for him, because these are guys coming to us from a completely different world who just got right in the thick of it with us. So it was a serious connection we made with those guys and the dogs too.
That was like his dream, to be a dog handler, and I mean, he got teamed up with one of the most ferocious dogs out there. And on a side note, Sicario, he made it home. He retired last year, and he's living on I want to say it's a dog rescue or ranch in San Diego that a lot of retired military and police dogs get to they go retire there. It's a great foundation that's taking care of him now. So he finished his career and was honorably discharged to the wonderful San Diego hills.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's good. So, Brazos, Sean, was he KIA when he got on the bird, or did he?
So they say he still had a faint heartbeat when we got him on the medevac, and we did get. I want to say it was the next day is when they confirmed to us that he didn't make it. And I know the dog handler that you guys had. I mean, he took it pretty hard. I mean, it was really rough on a lot of us. I mean, and then being right there next to him when it happened, it was hard. It was hard.
That set of dog handlers had a pretty tragic deployment because they deployed, I think, as a set of four dog handlers, all from not Whidbey Island. I can't remember the name of it. It's a Navy base.
Seattle.
It's north of Seattle. Yeah, I can't remember. Everett. That is a naval station just north of Everett. And it was Salazar, Brazos, Brodsky, Williams. I'm sorry, it's five, and Jones. Those five guys. Brazos and Brodsky both were killed within a few weeks of each other. And Williams' dog, Dynamite, was killed later in the deployment. So it's pretty. The attrition rate for those military working dog teams was crazy high.
Yeah.
So I mean, after Brazos' medevac, you guys go through that much needed, kind of rest in place. Is everyone's mind on the fact that Brazos may or may not make it, or is everyone kind of focused on the mission at that point and just like, because you're only halfway through this mission, like it's not like you just got to finish out the day and you're done. Like you have a lot of work to do still.
Part of it was focused on, is he going to make it? But then the reality is we're out here now. We're down a dog handler. We're down, an IED detection point. So, I mean, that was the purpose of the dog, is to detect the IED. So now we have to regroup our efforts in moving forward and reorganize how we're laid out. And we had several people that got medevac that same day for HECATs and other reasons. I want to say there was only one or two other people that actually got wounded in the firefight. So, I mean, they were obviously medevac, but yeah, the HECAT. So our numbers went down quite a bit, and we were able to be a little bit more agile in our movements. We didn't have quite as long of a footprint anymore. And then we still had the Afghans that were tailing us. So yeah, we finished that day, bunkered down, regrouped, and then continued pushing west, because we couldn't just hop in the trucks and go home. You can't do that. The operation is what we're there for, and we were still combat effective. So we had to go out and we had to finish it.
So, for you, coming from the intel world where this isn't necessarily your job, and it's also like not necessarily something that you can expect. So I think about going into Sperwan Ghar at all, and then going into the Horn, knowing we knew what that was going to be. Obviously that kind of like had to put you in a different mentality. So like going into that, because that was your first firefight, right? The first day of shooting.
It was one of the first.
Okay, I couldn't remember. Yeah. So going into this like bigger operation, and then on the back end, how did you see your kind of shift? Did you experience kind of change in how you processed information, how you thought about your job? I mean, how did that have an effect on you?
Yeah, it had quite the effect. How it changed how I looked at my job. I became way more focused, on what the infantrymen would need throughout a patrol. What are they going to go through? What kind of intel actually helps them?
Right.
And when you look at intel reports that we'd been given prior, they were not really brief at times. So the intel that we knew that you guys could use had to be brief and easy to remember, and not like a bunch of papers handed over to you that you're probably not going to read.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the time to. So we became way more concise in what we briefed, and anytime we had another operation, it's like, okay, look, this is what is important. And, there might be a couple foot stomps. Hey, look, guys, this is really important. You need to know about this. The area you're going, this is the type of threat you're up against.
Mm-hmm.
This is the type of, the type of SIGACs that we've seen here over the past 6 months. This is what you're going to get hit with. So knowing what we got hit with, knowing what type of resistance the Taliban would put up against us in the Horn of Panjwai, I knew that for the rest of this deployment, because this was only May.
Yeah.
The rest of this deployment, we're going to get hit by this same stuff day after day. So yeah, it really helped me refocus and know what I could do to help you guys out more. And I would spend time going down and meeting up with you guys after patrols, before patrols, just in off time, just talking, getting to know the guys in the platoons, so that I knew what it was they were looking for.
Yeah.
And because I could go off of my experience all day, but the level of experience that the platoons had was greater than mine. So I learned so much from them and wanted to tailor how I did my job to help to support them the best I could.
Yeah, that's really cool that you had the foresight and the wisdom to kind of develop your style of intel work to suit that, because once that intel worked its way down the ranks and disseminated down to us, we didn't care about, as just an average Joe grunt. All we need is a name and a village and a relative area, So if we had those three things, and we knew our route in and our planned route out, then we could do our job, our part of the puzzle, So it was good that you saw that you needed to get that concise and precise information down to us. And yeah, if it was pages long, for one, as Joes, we were never going to see it. It's just like grunts doing the fight. We were never going to see it. The PL might see it, But, for us, having that essential information was, essential to what we could do. Because our job was to shoot, walk into places, shoot, and then turn around and go back with hopefully something in tow or someone. And that also kind of lands on another theme of the deployment, and the reason that we didn't read these sheets of intel is because the op tempo was high, man. We were out and gone a lot. Every day we were doing something. Every platoon was doing something. So, the theme that emerged for you guys in headquarters was urgency, right? That was kind of a pet of Brian Kitching.
I think that theme, it probably joined us before the deployment. That was like the PT sessions that we'd have with Captain Kitching before we even got the orders to Afghanistan. He's like, look, you guys need to PT with a sense of urgency. You need to do this. Everything was with a sense of urgency. That your life or the guy next to you, their life depended on it. So yeah, urgency was a big part of how we worked in the headquarters platoon.
Yeah. How did that affect your day-to-day at Sperwan Ghar?
I knew that my days were going to be long, and if there was an operation going on, then I definitely needed to keep doing my work, but I'm also in there and I can listen to the radios and react if needed, and just monitor the situation and
Sure.
know that, hey, if one of the platoons is out doing a patrol to the northeast of Sperwan Ghar, what are they likely to come across, and how can I help them if something comes across the radio and they need assistance with something? What can I provide them? And I mean, it wasn't just me doing that. It was Lieutenant Van Cura would jump on the radio,
Sure.
and occasionally Captain Kitching would. He would get
Oh,
on, and he
we're
would.
aware. We know.
Yeah.
So kind of that sense of urgency, because we were talking the other day, there an opportunity came up as a result of some like last minute intelligence for us to get somebody that we really
Yeah.
wanted to get. So could you kind of spin the tale
Yeah.
about how things just kind of fell into place? And I'll set the stage a little bit before you can tell your story. We mentioned before that an ODA, a Special Forces captain, had lost his legs in an IED attack early on in our deployment. Essentially, somebody had snuck into a base that was being constructed and planted an IED at the entrance of a Connex. And when he went to open the Connex, it blew up and he lost his legs. And we had some intel at the time. We knew who it was, but no one could find him. And that's where Seth's job and his story kind of comes in.
So yeah, we'd gotten reports that the guy who placed the IED, his name was Najib. He was a young guy who, from what we understood, he was an IED emplacer. So we wanted to find him. He took the legs from this ODA team leader, and we're like, that's our focus. And that happened so early in the deployment that we're like, the guys up in the office, we're the three of us. We're like, we put his name on the whiteboard. We're like, that's our target number one for this deployment. Now we need to figure out how to get him. We need to figure out who he is. Like, where does he live? And it meant a lot to us, but nobody higher cared because there's no reporting. There's no actual serialized intel reporting talking about this guy. So nobody else has him on their radar. He's literally just on my whiteboard as a target that I want to find. And I don't know, when did this happen? In September, probably?
September sounds about right. Yeah, maybe even August, honestly.
Yeah, so it'd been several months. And one night, one of the ALP checkpoint commanders or deputy commanders had come by, and they would always want to come talk to Captain Kitching because he could get anything that they needed from what they understood or what they felt. And I mean, it would get really burdensome on him. So he'd be like, okay, Seth, I want you to go talk to this guy because I don't have the time. So I go to our conference room, and here he is, and I have one of the interpreters with me and one of the security guys, and he's talking, hey, we need money for fuel, we need this and that. And I was like, man, I can't guarantee you anything. Maybe if you provide us something, I could, get you some food or something. And he's like, okay, whatever. And he's looking at the map we have on the wall. It covered like a huge portion of our AO to the northeast of Sperwan Ghar. And he's focused on one particular village up along Route Hyena. And I asked him, I'm like, what are you looking at? Like, he's like, I'm just trying to figure out my village. Because he's not used to seeing the overhead imagery and a map like that. So I asked him, like, we've been looking for a guy. And I went through the story. I was like, yeah, the guy who placed the IED and explained everything to him. I was like, where does this guy live? And he pointed at one of the compounds in his village. He's like, he lives here. I was like, is he going to be there tonight? He's like, yeah, most likely. So I took that, I got the grid to where that compound was, and I went back and I told Captain Kitching, I'm like, look, this guy just gave us a compound to where Najib lives. I want to change First Platoon's patrol for tomorrow morning. He's like, you believe it? I was like, it's worth giving it a shot. And he's like, okay, go tell the PL. So I go down to the PL's room and I'm like, hey man, your patrol's changing. We're going to go hit this compound and I want you to bring back this person. And so we spend the next little while planning that out. And I mean, you guys had to get out there early. So it's that the urgency of knowing what to ask. I mean, I'm not a collector. It's not my job. But I can ask certain questions, and if the guy is willing to provide information, and okay, it's something we could use to get this target. So, I mean, it was important that we go out and do that, and we got that target.
Yeah.
So
that was a very successful mission. It went fairly smoothly. I mean, Curtis almost got shot. But that wasn't his fault. That was Bally's fault for sure. But yeah, we went in. I mean, we left at, I remember, actually, believe it or not, I remember this one. We left Sperwan Ghar at 11 o'clock at night. And we had a long walk in, slow walk under nods. Across that, it was to the east of Sketcha. There was kind of some open ground between Sketcha and the job. We kind of cut a diagonal across that open ground, and we pushed in. And our squad went to the south, set up a blocking position. Second squad pushed into the compound right at dawn, and they snatched up Najib pretty quick. Mm-hmm. I feel like we weren't there very long.
Okay, I was telling Grace the other day, like, you guys got back. I was still in PTs.
Yeah. Yeah,
I met up with you guys on the HOZ. I was in PT still.
Yeah, man.
Well, I think part of that is, like, this was a mission. This wasn't our normal patrol where it's like, go to this village, talk to the elders, get bats and hides on every military-age male in the village, go figure out whatever, go ask some people. No, it was like, hey, go in there, grab this dude, get him back to the district center. And, like, that's all we did. We didn't look for anybody else in the village. We didn't talk to anybody else in the village. We really just grabbed the guy. We bat and hided him, confirmed it was who we were looking for, and then we were out. And it's a good thing we were, because if we waited any longer, we would have gotten to a real thick gunfight, because we got shot at pretty bad on the way out.
Yeah, like on the way out, Bally sprained his ankle, and that held us up for probably like 2 or 3 minutes while he was trying to get this gumption to get back up and running. And they came out, and a couple guys came out and shot at us on the way out, hit the wall next to Curtis, a foot away.
I don't even know anymore. I mean, because it was when Tom and I were trying to climb over a wall. So everyone else was down in the grape rows.
We were down in the rows.
And we're coming up trying to cross over the wall to clear to the other side. So we're the only ones that they can see. Yeah. And so they start shooting at us, but we can't move. So we just, like, laid down. Like, I just hoped that they were as inaccurate as they always were. There's literally nothing we could do because we couldn't shoot back, because we couldn't shoot over the top of your guys' heads. So it's just like, great, this is where I die.
But no, it went pretty well. We laid down some suppressive fire in that tree line about 50 meters out. Perez, Juan Rambo came up, deafened my left eardrum because the muzzle of the saw was about right here. So I was getting all the compression off that. And he had this habit, Seth, of just letting her rip, all of it.
Yeah.
And so I was shooting, he was shooting, and then another guy came up and shot to my right, and I was getting the concussion from both guns, and I just, like, laid my gun down and stuck my fingers in my ears and hit the prone, because I was like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to save what's left of my hearing.
Yeah.
And then we hightailed it out of there and hauled ass, because second squad had Najib, so we were just hauling ass to get back to the trucks. Yeah. And we did haul ass, getting shot at as we ran away, I think. But all in all, for an average day in Panjwai, that was a very successful mission.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you guys got back. We processed them at the base, and I think I probably did another biometric enrollment, and then just to make sure we had a good solid one, and put them back in the trucks. I don't know if you guys took them over to the district center, but okay,
sure did.
It was you, and I got on the phone with the ODA. I was like, "Hey guys, I got a present for you." That was a good capture. Nobody got killed. we all made it home that day, and he spent, I don't know what happened after, it's Afghan judicial system, so yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he's up to now.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure
Maybe
he's
he
up to his old tricks.
hanging out in his little hut down in his kitchen.
Yeah, he's
Still
he's a
making
great
IDs,
farmer.
I'm sure.
But we made his life a lot worse for at least a short period of time.
A short period of time.
So like, and kind of going back to that theme of timeliness and urgency. I mean, what was it, like maybe less than 24 hours between when you got that intel and that guy was in the system?
Less, because
Yeah.
I mean, it was the night before. I mean, you said you stepped off at 11.
Yeah.
I was talking to the ALP guy that night. So a couple hours, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where your patrol originally was going to be going off to, but
I remember, I think it was somewhere shitty. So we were already
Yeah.
in the mindset of going to like a
Yeah.
Sketcha or Najad or something.
Yeah,
like.
I don't think
Yeah,
we were too
so-
upset by that mission.
No.
I mean, it was a quick shift in plans and go.
Yeah.
Now that wasn't really the only time that urgency kind of came into play. I mean, there was. Do you remember the time with the Chinooks?
So we were getting a resupply. We probably had 2 Chinooks on the HLZ, and part of being in headquarters, you go help with everything. So if you have spare time, you go help unload the helicopter. And so I'm down there on the HLZ, and I see one of my interpreters come running toward the HLZ, and he's listening to radio intercepts that we could get, because the Taliban all used really cheap radios.
Yeah.
So it was like having another radio and just listening in on whatever station was active. And he comes running toward me. He's like, they said they got an RPG and they're waiting for the helicopters to take off and go back out, the way they came in. So I run up the ramp on the Chinook, and I grab the crew chief, and he's got his big Darth Vader helmet on, so you can't really hear anything, and it's so loud. I was like, RPG that way. You need to fly the other way. When you take off, go the other way. And he's like, okay. And I stick my head into the cockpit, and I'm yelling as loud as I can for the pilots to hear this as well. And they rogered up that they understood. And when they took off, they did a really low hover, spun around a 180, and just took off. And they try not to take off going in that direction because it screws up all our antennas. But I'd rather have to go fix some antennas with Olive and the combo guys than have to go rescue a Chinook that gets shot down right off the edge of our base.
Yeah.
So
that'd be a
Bad.
it would
day.
have been. It would have been awful.
Bad day. That'd be
Because-
a long, drawn out day.
Yeah, and so working with those interpreters, they knew, hey, look, if we hear something that's urgent, we can't just wait till the end of the day or whatever. We need to go act on it. Mm-hmm. And they weren't your typical Afghan interpreters. These were they had been born and raised in Afghanistan, but they fled during the Soviet invasion time frame. And one of them was an American. He immigrated to the United States, and the other had immigrated to the United Kingdom.
Really?
So they were both highly trusted interpreters. They weren't normal interpreters for us. So
Which turfs were these?
this was it was Wahid and Mike.
I remember Mike. They were almost always
Yeah.
in the talk, right?
Yeah, they were in
Yeah.
the talk all the
Yep.
time.
They were in the talk a lot, and then we set them up with those radios down there on the gun line from when they used to have artillery out at Sperwan Ghar. They took over like a little shack down there and just listened to the radios for a while.
I didn't even know they did that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why we're doing this
Yeah.
podcast, so
Yeah.
we can get those
Yeah,
little
we're
insights,
learning.
because I had no idea that was even a thing.
I mean, I remember
Yeah.
seeing them in the talk. I didn't know about the listening station down by the gun line, and
Yep. They did some really good work out of there. And I mean, if at the end of the day, if it came down to just reporting that the Taliban had RPGs and were going to try to shoot down that helicopter, they prevented that. That was
It's worth a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's worth
Yeah,
a lot.
It's worth magnitudes right there.
Yeah.
well, it's one of those things that it's easy for us to be like, oh man, glad that didn't happen, but that'd be like erasing an entire moment. Like if that had happened, and if an aircraft had gone down in our sector, it wouldn't have just been like a flippant, like, oh, I'm glad they caught that call. It would have been like, I wish I could go back and erase this moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any
'Cause,
sense at all, but
I mean,
it's
in follow-on deployments I've had to work aircraft that have gone down for
Yeah.
various reasons. And I mean, you're a pilot, you know the complexities of that, and doing it in a combat zone when you're under fire in a really remote area.
Yeah.
It's not easy. So
I had to do a 9.5-hour mission one day because the aircraft went down. Like, that's
Yeah.
way beyond our allowable flight limits for a day. But you do it. You have to.
Mhm.
And it's nothing compared to what those guys on the ground are having to do. Walk out there, secure it. They're pulling body parts out of wreckage. They're sitting there for days until they can find a way to get that thing out of there. And
yeah,
I mean, it's
because they don't leave the aircraft there.
no.
If it's
There's a way to get it out.
It-
They're going to get it out before they'll blow it up. That's for sure.
Yeah, it had been a multi-day fight for us,
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I kind of want to take a tangent here.
All right.
Okay.
Because it's something that I thought about the other day, but this speaks a lot to something that we always participated in, which is these hypotheticals, the what ifs of situations. So like this idea of an aircraft getting shot down, like or a drone getting like a wrecking in our AO or whatever. It was always like these what ifs. Like if the aircraft would have gone down, what would it have been like? What would we have had to do? And I remember, Curtis, you and I would have the what if conversation a lot. What if we get separated from the platoon on patrol? And we both had our like contingency plans in place for if we got separated during a firefight, or we just couldn't get back, or we got left, or whatever the situation was, how we would plan to get back to Sperwan Ghar on our own. And so you run through these hypothetical situations all the time while you're there. And I feel like in some ways, man, those are kind of dark, dangerous games to play in your own mind, but they're important to an extent.
And the answer was walk south to the reggaes.
Yeah. Yeah. My answer was find a hidey hole, camouflage the shit out of myself, wait till dark, walk shit creeks to south to the reggaes, and then just walk the open ground back to Sperwan Ghar under nods and hopefully, make it back.
in headquarters, and the amount of time that we spent looking at maps and looking at the camera feeds around the base. There's that road going due west out of Sperwan Ghar.
The Taliban Highway.
Taliban Highway.
Yeah.
So Captain Kitching and I were looking at that way one day, and he's like, "Do you think I could run all the way down Taliban Highway, where it turns right, take that north all the way to Hyena, and then back down Route Brown and make it with both my legs and not get killed?" And I was like, "Well, knowing how fast you run, sir, you'll make it halfway."
No, you know what? I believe that if he had, put his PTs on, carried like an M9 in his hand or something, and he just like set up at the ass crack of dawn one morning, I bet he could have made it. I bet he could have done it so fast, because like they wouldn't even known what to think at first. They'd be like, "What is going on right now?" And he'd be moving so quick. There's no way they'd get IEDs out in front of him. I bet he could do it. I bet he would have done it once.
Yeah, I don't think I have that much faith in him. Everybody's human, even Brian Kitching.
Well, not that he was like superhuman fast, but like A, the confusion of it, and B, like they need time to like go turn the IEDs on.
And plan like an ambush and stuff.
Yeah, so they need like 20, 30 minutes. And that route, I think it was probably, I'm ballparking, maybe like 4 or 5 miles. He could do that in 25 minutes. Yeah, done.
that's
He's
true.
got it. He's got it.
So
Yes,
I
Brian,
do
you could have
that,
done it.
But our scenario was like middle of the afternoon.
No.
Yeah.
Nope. IEDs are on.
Yeah.
No way.
And so, I mean, that's the type of stuff, like, we'd sit there and we'd have hypotheticals about that. And, you know, just all kinds of random things.
Yeah.
Or what if, you know, the PTIDs at Mossam broke loose and we got to go get that? I mean, stuff like that happens. The PTIDs
Yeah.
break loose.
Yeah, the
That's a good one,
hypothetical
too.
of if the cop was getting overran,
Yeah.
what would we do to launch a defense? And of course, honestly, I think because those cluster of villages to the west were so much closer, but they were closer to the Afghan side of the cop. I feel like if it had been switched, and because they were only a couple 100 meters from that side of the cop, if it had been switched and they were that close to our side of the cop, I wonder if we would have gotten hit more on the cop itself. So there's another hypothetical, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we had that
probably
good
would've.
solid like 500 meters of open ground to the east. Then to north was pretty it was pretty dense.
And every time we did, you know, take fire, it was always from the east.
Yeah.
You know,
I
they'd
know.
lob a couple grenades over the wall or whatever, and then we'd completely overreact to it. But that's
Yes, we would.
the
you're
American
shooting
way.
our home.
It is the American way.
Yeah. You lobbed rounds into our home. Now we're going to dump 10,000 rounds into the wall that you were behind.
Yep.
Make that wall collapse.
Yes. Maybe. Well, we thought always thought it was weird that, like, we agree, like, the East was where almost everything kicked off for us, but when we got to Sperwan Ghar, they were all, like, the unit force was all talking about the West. They said, the West, the 2-8 grid line, the 2-8 grid line, the West. And we're...
Yeah, because I want to say that was where they focused. And everything they had briefed to me is like, you know, you get out to the 2-8 grid line and, you know, things get a little sketchy out there. And, you know, this one village is safe, and Taliban Highway, how many times do we go down that road and not have anything happen? Most times going down Taliban Highway. I think they called it that just because maybe one time they came across somebody. But that was our entrance into some of those western villages. We'd have to go down that a little ways if we use the roads.
Well, then that's a key point. We did it a lot early on. We walked on Taliban Highway a lot early on. But once we got off the roads, come around late June, I never touched it again.
Yeah.
You know what's crazy is I can only remember 2 firefights for our platoon out to the west.
Same. Our first 2.
Our first 2 were out there to the west.
Didn't you guys have the very first firefight we got into?
We did.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Way
right at
out
the 2-8
there.
grid line.
Yeah.
And one of the guys fell on a canal, right?
That was Curtis.
Curtis? That was you? Oh, yeah. Okay.
I didn't fall into the canal. I jumped.
He
You
jumped
were
into
pushed?
the
Is that
canal.
what it is?
Jumped emphatically into the canal at the urging of my platoon leader.
Oh, man.
I'm glad that story made the rounds. That's important to me.
Yeah, for sure. I was laughing so hard.
Oh, man. You know, this kind of what if game is pretty much your job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we did it as kind of a mental exercise or boredom on guard or, you know, late night sleeping. But, you know, kind of thinking about these scenarios, how did the risk along Route Brown kind of play into, you know, those scenarios for you as an intel analyst? Because, I mean, for us, it's a choke point. I mean, it's the only way in and out, right?
It was the only paved road into Sperwan Ghar, and it was the only way we were going to get in there, and it was a choke point because that's where we are constantly running convoys, and we're bound to have something happen on it.
Yeah.
Luckily, you know, it being paved, the IED threat there is lower. But I mean, we're guaranteed something else is going to happen, and just because it's paved, maybe somebody along one of the culverts could, you know, put something in there. But luckily we never had that happen. But we'd constantly have firefights along Route Brown, and no matter what operation, if it was mounted, dismounted, you know, that threat was always there. especially later in the deployment when we were doing more of those operations around where that schoolhouse was.
Adam's Eye.
Yeah, Adam's Eye. And, or we had that operation where they wanted to cut that road through the middle of these people's fields. It's another one of those days where, monitoring the radios and the talk, hearing an explosion. It was that close that you can hear it, and knowing that, okay, something happened. Our guys are probably in the thick of it right now. What do we need to do to support? And in this situation, there wasn't a lot I could do from there, because once the radios came back on, we heard them say, "Hey, we're hit. We're turning around and coming back." And there was a mounted convoy that was just there to provide overwatch. So this truck goes flying back onto the base, and I immediately, once I heard that radio transmission, I ran from my office across the compound to the aid station, and I ran into the medics, and I was like, "We got casualties. They're on their way. Get ready." And they all jump up and they're grabbing their bags, getting stuff ready, and we run out to the HLZ, and we see the truck come like flying around the corner. And usually nobody's driving fast on the base.
Yeah.
This is the fastest anybody I'd ever seen, and they're just flying, and it's just one truck, and they make it around the HLZ to the aid station, and the TC jumps out and he yells, "Get them out, get them out." And I'm right there. I'm the closest to the truck. So I jump in, and that's where I see, this truck got hit by an RPG. Its RPG cages dangling off, and the smell and the sight, and then the screaming you hear inside. It's unreal. And to turn and see somebody you knew who's no longer there. He had lost his life on the impact of that RPG. And then everybody else in that truck, their lives have now changed. One, the gunner lost his leg. The other soldier in the back had shrapnel in his neck, shrapnel in the driver's neck, and just the trauma of being there in that situation for those guys in that truck, all 5 of them. It's horrible to witness, and to be that guy who's now reacting to that and trying to get Sergeant Swindle out of that truck so that we could get to the guys who are still alive. It was horrible, because you're having to take him out, and he's your friend, and he's not there anymore. But he's also in the way of you trying to get to another guy and render aid. So we had to get him out as quickly as we could, get him onto a stretcher, and then move on to Hendrick and get him out. And it's a really tough situation to get a gunner out who just had his leg cut off by an RPG. Like, how do you move him? How do you do it without causing even more pain? And
so you said he was still in his harness, right?
Yeah, he was still in his harness. He was trying to get him out and get him through the truck. And I mean, those trucks are pretty high up. So getting him down and then onto a stretcher so the PA can start, doing his job. It was pretty rough time. And it all goes back to the urgency. This is what we needed to be doing. I mean, intel guy on the cop, just overhearing the radios, reacts and and goes and puts himself in that situation to offer as much help as possible.
Sure.
And I wasn't the only one who ran over there. We had guys just swarm, and once people realized what was going on, we had enough people to get everybody out, start rendering aid, get the 9 lines were already on their way up so that we could have medevac come in as quickly as we could. And it ran so smoothly trying to react to that, because I mean it was September. We had been through 9 lines before. We'd been through reacting to fire. This was the first time we'd, I think, had an RPG actually strike one of our trucks and cause the loss of life and to wound several other guys, and for it to happen right out our front door. We never got reporting ahead of time that, yeah, there's an RPG cell right here. They had never shot an RPG in that area before that we'd known about. I know they attacked the ALP checkpoint that was about a mile north of us, maybe that far. They got hit regularly, but it was small arms. It was never, to the best of my knowledge, anything more than a PKM. And now to have an RPG strike on a truck not even a quarter mile outside our gate, that was rough. That was hard to swallow, that it happened so close.
And that was just a bad day all around.
Yeah.
Me and Curtis will probably take some time to break that down later on, because that story needs to be told in its fruition. Yeah. But
I think a good interviewee for that would be John Orbaugh.
Yes. Yeah, he's on our list for sure.
Yeah.
We've mentioned how much we like old Sergeant Orbaugh many times before, but yeah, I believe he shook off a couple IED blasts. He shook off almost a direct hit with an RPG to his bulldozer, which is nowhere near as heavily armored as an MATV.
Yeah.
So it was yeah, I mean, we were lucky that day not to have two major incidents, really.
Yeah. And because I think, Curtis, you were in the truck.
I was in the truck right in front of him.
So you were right in front of him,
that.
and I was right in front of you in the next truck up, and I remember hearing that explosion and thinking, like, fuck. You know, like it was close and it was loud, and I was like, it didn't really sound like an IED. It sounded different. Didn't have the oomph that an IED has. And then Morgan spun up on the radio, and it was just bad news to hear, because it was right off the bat. It was KIA, you know.
Yeah, it was definitely a different sounding explosion, because we'd all heard IEDs multiple times, but the RPG has a distinct noise.
Yeah. Well, it definitely got our gunners on. Like, I think Pfeiffer was my gunner, and he was tweaking out. Because we didn't move. We were still there.
We stayed out there for a minute, too.
Stayed out there for a while, too. We never got the guy that did it. We don't know what happened to him, where he was. So as far as we knew, he was still out there. He'd already shot several RPGs that day. So there were a lot of puckered buttholes. And it's, what happened to Sergeant Swindle, that definitely pushed through the cop real hard. Because it was, like as Seth said, that wasn't something that happened to click outside the wire, and that we came back to and just told people what happened. I mean, everyone on the base, people that weren't usually exposed to that battlefield trauma, were right up front with it.
And probably one of the worst of the deployment.
Yeah,
because it's
worst
almost a
visually.
Visually,
visually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
because you've got 3 people that are fucked up, and so that's a bad thing to be exposed to.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you make a good point, Seth, that the timing of that happening, while it was absolutely tragic, and it really hurt a lot of people, especially 3rd Platoon. They had a rough go of our time at Sperwan Ghar, but because we had been there for so long, and we had this urgency kind of drilled into us, and we had these battle rhythms, and we had these battle drills, and everybody knew their place. So there was no delay in figuring out, okay, this is what we need to do, and we need to get Jason out, and we need to get to Hedrick, and we need to get to McCaffrey. We need, you said it yourself, it was smooth. It happened the way it was supposed to, and had that happened in April, I don't think we would remember it or you would remember it in the same way.
No, it would have been a mess.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it was a mess, but it operated smoothly. Everybody reacted in a way to get the job done and get it done quickly and efficiently. And it didn't matter what needed to be done, we were doing it. And we did it because, their life depended on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, Hendrick lost the lower half of his leg, but he's still alive. Yep. McCaffrey had his wounds to his neck, but he's still alive today. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the little amount of work I had to put into that, could have been what was needed to save their lives. And yep. It doesn't matter what you do, like, you're reacting to save your brother's life. And I was in the safety of my office when this happened, and to know that, the guys are out there, like you guys, you were still out there. What do we need to do now to wrap this situation up and then go out and support you guys to make sure that you have what's needed to continue this mission?
Sure.
And I mean, that's what we had to do. It's not like the day wasn't over. We weren't done with our operations.
Yeah.
And it's September. We're not going home yet.
I think that's one of the hardest things about the grind of being in there, is that not only does the day not end, like you mentioned that with Brazos, but the same with Swindle. The day and the mission isn't over. You got to keep pushing. But then when that particular event wraps up and reaches its finality, you go back out over and over and over again.
Yep.
And so by the time we got to September, one of the things that was, I don't know if this was unique to our particular experience. I'm sure other units have had similar kind of interactions, but by that point in the deployment, everybody on the COP more or less had gotten into the thick of it. It didn't matter what your MOS was. It didn't matter what role you played. Pretty much everybody had seen some good, solid combat by then. And so even if you weren't a combat MOS, you would still had that experience like you had out in the Horn and other missions that you'd been on up to that point. And so everybody was kind of on this different level of working, including, the talk guys, even like Soren Armballs, he's a mechanic. And so, it was just a different, it was the great equalizer in a lot of ways, and that everybody got their piece of it, their piece of the pie.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because we were short manned as an infantry company, because we were short one of our platoons drastically. Yeah, we were short one of our platoons, and
the platoons were short.
And the platoons were short. So I think we had, Seth probably knows, I think 100 people total on the COP would be
around that.
Around that. And a normal infantry company clocks in around like 140. So 100 with attachments is a pretty low number. So if you were on Sperwan Ghar and you weren't an 11 Bravo, you were going to find yourself at some point manning a turret, driving a truck, walking out on a patrol with first platoon. Like, it was going to happen at some point.
So going off of that, there was at one point some guys from brigade had come down. It was like a mental health team,
the combat stress team.
The combat stress team. Mm-hmm. I mean, they came by, and they were there when one of the few times where the base actually got attacked. Mm-hmm. So when the call came out to man the wall, they're out there too, because they have a rifle. They can shoot. Mm-hmm. Hopefully,
these are like chaplain's assistants.
Yeah, but weren't they told they weren't allowed to get on the wall or something? So remember, we were like, "Hey, come on, let's go get get on the wall.
I
go
think
shoot
they
back.
were just, they weren't sure what to do,
Oh,
so they
okay.
needed somebody to help them along the way. But we got spoken to afterward when Treat had done their paperwork to get their cabs, and somebody had called in and like, what? They weren't supposed to leave the wire. And his response back was, they didn't. The base got attacked, and they had to shoot back.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of units, like especially like the PSD for the colonel or whatever at CAF, they would get real jacked about coming to Sperwan Ghar because of how often we took contact.
Yeah.
And like, that drive down from Hyena down Route Brown, like you could see it in them. They were just jacked. Like they were hoping something would kick off on that short 1 mile stretch of road.
I don't think they ever had anything happen.
No. Well, as we start to come towards the terminus of this interview, we did come home from Afghanistan. What did your experiences in Sperwan Ghar and Panjwai do for you going forward in your career and kind of in your life?
Well, it was hard to top that deployment. I had one more deployment in the Army. I actually spent a little bit of time up in Zabul, but came back down to our battalion. That was at CAF doing the same mission that 164 had done when we were at Sperwan Ghar. So I knew what it was, and I knew it was going to be boring and a waste of time. So yeah, topping that deployment in 2012, it didn't happen. So it set me up understanding, like I talked about earlier, knowing that the guys who are out there fighting the war, they need the intel to be precise, and they need it to be something that they can easily use. So we have to, as intel professionals, build those products that are usable by the infantrymen. And I've been told in products that have made sense, leaving the military and in my civilian job, that that's a little too tactical for what we do. And I look at the person telling me that, I'm like, do you know what the guy at the receiving end of this intel needs? Because I do. And they need something that they can use at the tactical level. And they just don't understand it because they don't have combat experience. They have office experience, which
I ran into that a lot when I was there in 17 as a pilot, because when I was at Kandahar, we were attached to a Black Hawk battalion, and they are all about their route to the objective. That's their whole planning process. How do we get here? How do we do this? But the Apaches we're on scene tactical. Like, we're talking to the ground force. We're telling them where to go. Like, we're basically infantry in the sky in terms of like how we see the battlefield. We're not infantrymen. We're totally pogues. But we need our products to be like what theirs are. And they always give us these crappy products based on some weird thing of like, this is where the angle the picture was taken from the satellite or whatever. I'm like, no, I need a map that has north up, because the infantryman is looking at a map where north is up, and I need to talk to the same thing. I need to be able to sees the same thing that I do. And they didn't, their intelligence shop didn't understand it. Like, no, it's not the way we do things. I'm like, well, that's how the ground guy does it. It's like, go into that brief, ask all the SF guys that were taken to the objective what their products look like, and they're all north up. So it needs to match.
I mean, that's how it should be. No matter what level, you being the pilot, or in my current job, providing that intel to a ship out on the water, knowing how they look at it, how they look at the intelligence from their perspective, is so valuable to the intel professional making that. Because if I'm making a product based on how I see the world,
right,
that's my perspective. But for the guy out doing an interdiction or doing an operation, knowing how they see it is so much more important, because they're the one who's putting their life on the line. My life is no longer on the line, but providing that level of intel in a way that they can use it is so important. And so many people don't understand that. They think, it needs to be strategic and written this way and blah blah blah, and we need so many bullet points and whatever. It's like, no, you need tactical level stuff that the guy who's actually going to get this guy will find useful.
And I hope you fell into a command that appreciated that, but the chances are probably not that great.
There's not many commands like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to one of the I think people from the outside world look at the military and they think it's this, like, maybe not so much anymore because the mythos has been pretty much deconstructed over the past 20 years, but people used to look at the military and think, oh, everybody's professional and squared away and like really on this particular level of being, but it's not really the case. A lot of times it's the kid that couldn't hold a job at Taco Bell, or it's the college dropout who doesn't know what the hell to do with his life. This guy right here, for example. And it's a huge, massive organization where there's so much disparagement between priorities and experience and things like that, that continuity of information and connectivity just breaks down all over the place. And so, a guy in CAF who's working in that shop at, a battalion in CAF, he is not going to have that experience. And it's no fault of his own. He just gets stuck there. It's luck of the draw, and depending on what your job is and where you're going to be going and what you're doing. I mean, there's infantrymen that go entire deployments. We went the entire deployment in Iraq and didn't even see combat, because of where we were at and what we were doing. And so, it's a big, massive organism that doesn't really do a good job of having all of its synapses firing at once, except for when everybody is shrunken down and everybody is on that same level and everybody has that shared overarching experience. Like, as you've talked about, by the time you got around to September, October, the last 2, 3, 4 months of the deployment, our company was on that level because everybody was there, and we can kind of insulate ourselves against all the exterior bullshit because we knew what we needed to do to get the job done as well as we could do within the parameters that were put on us.
Exactly. I mean, it was a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're gonna end on that, and what we always do at the end, Seth, is we kind of give everyone a chance to anything that we didn't cover that you kind of wanted to say, or if there's anything you wanted to say, the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, we covered quite a bit from the deployment and from that side of it, and a lot of guys, they did that deployment, they got out of the Army, they went home and moved on with their life. And eventually everybody does that. And where I work now, in the office I work, it is 100% veteran. 100%, which is nice. I mean, it's multiple branches. Not everybody had the stellar combat experience that we may have had, but they're all veterans. And when I went through the VA process, it was cumbersome and took some time, but I eventually did it. And I work with people that they've been out of the Army or the Navy for years. We're talking over a decade, maybe close to 2 decades. Never went through the VA process.
Yeah.
Never got a VA rating. And some of them have, they have problems that are linked to their military career, and they're not getting compensated for it. They're not getting cared for it, or they're paying for that care out of pocket. And I mean, everybody knows that the VA has its issues, but that shouldn't stop people from going and at least putting in the paperwork so the VA knows that you are a veteran and you have this issue that's linked to your service. So if anybody's out there who hasn't gone through that process, it's become easier. There's agencies out there that will help, many at no cost. I went through the county I live in. they have a Veteran Affairs Division that they do nothing but go through people's military files and work step by step with them to file their VA claim, get any of the VA benefits. And so I went through them and went through the process and didn't pay a dime. And you shouldn't have to. These are benefits that we earned through our service, and whether or not you want to take advantage of them or not, that's up to you. But at least go through, let the VA know that you're there, and down the road, if you do need that medical help, they're there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a country that spends billions of dollars developing fighter planes. They can spend.
We waste money on the most ridiculous things.
Yeah, we can.
So
we can
if
spend
you're
a little
worried
bit of money
about,
to help somebody out.
if you're worried about, it's going to cost them money, they have the money.
Yeah.
The VA's budget is fine. Like one more person, 10 more people. If anything, it'll actually probably help them get it, fight for a larger budget.
Sure.
By more people actually going through that process. I put it off a couple years after getting out, and I regret that.
Me too. Yeah, same.
But once I got through and did it, I'm like, I should have done this sooner.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Should have done it sooner.
I should have done it the day I got out of the Army.
Yep. Anyway, that's my message. I hope people go out there and do it. It'll only help them.
Well, Seth, we appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a really good conversation to have with you. You're our first guest who has not been in the platoon, and it's a different job. So it's been really cool to get that different perspective into the mix so that we can start to really flesh out this picture and get this different angles on it. So we appreciate you.
I appreciate you guys doing this and the work you guys are putting into it, doing the interviews. I've enjoyed this. I enjoy seeing your updates you guys are putting out. Keep up the great work. You guys are doing an awesome job.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Right, have a good one.